Hi, I'm Amanda Lamond. I'm the director of the Center for Integrative Law, and this is part of a series of interviews helping students to think about their careers differently and a bit more broadly than just getting articles in the top 5 firms. With me today is Janet Taylor Hall, who's the CEO of Cognia Law. Welcome, Janet.
Thank you, Amanda.
So we're going to jump right into the questions which have been provided to me by the group of students in the mentorship program. But the starting point is they all want to know a bit more about what Cognia Law does. And one of the questions was that your website describes Cognia Law as a law company. So what's the difference between a law firm and a law company?
It's probably quite a good place to start. Essentially, the key difference between a law company and a law firm is essentially a law firm is a regulated body, regulated under the Law Society or the SRA in the UK or whatever the governing society, law society is in the jurisdiction you operate. And essentially, a law firm is basically set up and structured to provide legal advice and legal opinion. And that is something that a law company doesn't do. Now, what does that mean in practical terms, in terms of the type of work that a law company and a law firm, or a lawyer in a law company, or a law graduate in a law company and a law firm? So on a practical level, in a law company, you will find, in most instances, the type of work that lawyers end up doing is either the more junior work that you'd find done in a law firm, which is, it doesn't clarify as legal advice or legal opinion. So that might be due diligence, it might be review for litigation and arbitration, and various other things like that, repapering, reg reform, banking repapering, etc., etc. And typically all of that work, if being done for a law firm, will be done under the supervisory guise of the law firm by the law company. The other probably more prevalent type of work is really the type of work that one will find oneself doing as an in-house lawyer. And that will be everything from negotiating contracts, drafting contracts, reviewing contracts. There might be banking and finance contracts like structured products and derivatives. There might also be essentially commercial contracts. So anything from an NDA to quite a sophisticated outsourcing contract. Now, essentially, if in drafting those contracts, you need a particular legal opinion or legal advice as to a particular position to be taken, that will always be referred through to a law firm. But a lawyer working in a law company will typically be in a position to negotiate that contract as any in-house lawyer would negotiate that contract within the bounds of essentially the playbook, we call it, but it's essentially the terms or the parameter of the terms or the negotiating guidelines that the organization in question has actually set. So the type of work that you'll see being done in that space is, as I said, contract work, both sort of business as usual contract work, large projects. For example, the introduction of GDPR in the UK, as Papier will drive a very similar thing here, led to a lot of...
Break down some of those acronyms for those of us who aren't familiar.
Okay, so GDPR and Papier essentially is the data protection legislation. GDPR is the European one, and Papier is the South African one. Now, essentially, when you have any form of new legislation coming in, could be the same on the banking and finance side. There's been a change in the rate, for example. So there's a change, a movement away from the LIBOR rate globally in terms of the rate that's negotiated. Now, all of that has an impact on underlying contracts. So in other words, there's a regulatory change. You've got to have a look at all the historical contracts that are in place and ascertain, do they need to be completely renegotiated? Do they just need an addendum that recognizes the change? Do they need to be amended and renegotiated? So all of that leads to a body of work. Now, that type of work is often and very well suited to be done by a law company, essentially. So you know, any organization undertaking that will seek legal advice and legal opinion from a law firm, and they will say, you know, in this particular regulatory change, you need to institute the following changes to your contract. Now, go away and make those contractual changes. And essentially that will be done either by an in-house lawyer, a team of in-house lawyers, or a law company, or a combination of the two of them. So I think the long and short of it is that if you work for a law company, you do legal work. You work as a lawyer, but what you will not find yourself doing is spending hours opining on the law, and opining on you know, what is the particular legal position in a certain jurisdiction. So you know, if that type of work is really what, you know, what gets you out of bed in terms of being a lawyer, that's very much what you'll find in a law firm. However, you know, you can still operate as a lawyer in a law company. The other distinction between law companies and law firms is that legal graduates get extremely good experience working for law companies, because you know, what they will do is they will find themselves undertaking, you know, if they come in as a junior, they'll be doing legal research, they'll be assisting on due diligence exercises, they'll be doing some basic contract work, they'll be working on arbitration and litigation and investigation reviews, to name a few things. They might get involved in you know, extracting information out of contracts, so they'll become quite familiar with that. They'll be working with technologies like AI data extraction tools. But what they will not be doing is they will not be working towards kind of their articles, essentially. So what we typically do with law graduates is we'll bring them in on a 2-year graduate training program, where they'll get extremely good experience, and actually good base experience. What we're typically finding is that law firms actually find those candidates who've done a bit of time in a law company attractive, because you know, they get them in and they've got far more practical experience that they might have had coming directly out of university. But an individual will need to go and work for a law firm, either for 1 or 2 years, depending on whether you've done your practical legal training course, and depending on the requirement. I mean, some law firms, even if you have done a year's PLT course, will require you still to do 2 years of articles with them. Others will be happy to do 1. That typically is the smaller to the mid level. And then after that, you will then, you know, that's your candidate attorney piece. And then after that, you'll be a qualified lawyer. So what we
They're not
find
doing
is
articles
that,
with you. I just want to clarify that they
no,
wouldn't be. You don't offer articles because
no,
you're not a law firm.
Exactly. So, but what we do offer is we do offer this graduate training program, which tends to be a very good. And we've had a good number of individuals now that have been through that. They've taken their PLT in parallel in some cases. They've done they've studied through UNISA, or I think UCT does a part-time PLT course. And then what has ended up happening is they've done their articles, and interestingly enough, we've had a number of them that have returned to us post articles. So they've done their articles, got the badge, enjoyed it, and then said no, they're interested in returning to the law company. I think maybe another distinction is working in most work that you do in a law company is team-based. When we look for individuals that suit our environment, one of the questions we ask, and one of the elements of aptitude that we seek is essentially individuals that enjoy being team players. Now, I mean, Amanda, as you and I know, that does not necessarily describe all lawyers. Essentially, some of the most brilliant lawyers in the world are you would describe as lone wolves. They are brilliant at what they do. They enjoy that sort of individuality that comes with it. I mean, it doesn't mean that you lose your identity when you operate as a part of a team, but essentially, I think it's something very important. I'd say it's probably an important consideration for in-house. It's not quite as team-based as law companies are, but if you're a real team player, and I think individuals are kind of either one way or the other, or somewhere in between, in-house and law company, particularly law company, tends to be a very good environment. Individuals that are very lone wolfish and individual, while they might be brilliant, will tend not to fit very well into the law company environment. The upside of it, of course, is it tends to have an incredibly, if you're one of those type of people, it's a great environment to work in. People love coming to work, even virtually. It's been a very interesting phase, having a sort of team of people that we're literally coming into the office every day. Overnight are now operating virtually. If you ask them what they miss most, they miss the team. They miss seeing people. They miss working as part of a physical team, essentially, even though they are. So that I think is quite an important consideration.
And I just want to jump in and add at this point that some people, when they hear what you say, and it's, you're not getting articles, and you might be doing more junior work than, in a law firm. I want to add that it really depends what sort of law firm you're at, and the type of experience that you will be getting there, because in many you are you're serving documents and you're photocopying. So there's not a huge amount of legal experience that you're getting. It does depend on the law firm, but some people are getting quite a short end of the actual amount of legal work. And then you also said about not giving legal opinions. And I have to say that when I was in a large firm, it was quite disappointing to me that as soon as it came time to give an opinion on anything, and when it actually got interesting, off we went to the advocate's office. And so I found that we didn't really give opinions on very much. It was always then a matter of deferring to advocates. So, yeah.
I think it's a very good point, Amanda, in terms of, I say that you won't find yourself doing a lot of photocopying in a law company, because we don't photocopy. we're a modern virtual organization, essentially.
I might be giving my age away. Maybe people aren't photocopying.
No. People are scanning. People are still scanning and photocopying and doing all sorts of things. So I think you're absolutely right. I think that, look, if you're a law graduate looking to become a qualified lawyer, you're going to have to become a candidate attorney. There's no other way around it, essentially. You're going to need to go through that phase. I think the point I was making, though, is what we found with a number of our law grads is, they join us and they get extremely good experience, and hence as a result of that, they get better articles than they might have got otherwise. And what they do tend to find is they go and do their articles and then they come back, because actually the work, we've talked a lot about graduates and newly qualified lawyers, but we've got some pretty senior lawyers. So our workforce essentially has some graduates, has some newly qualified lawyers, has the sort of 2 to 5 PQE. Then there are a number of 5+, then there's 10+, and we've got a number of individuals that are working in our organization who ex-general counsel, and very senior in terms of the type of work they've done. And they've worked, in large, not only large law firms, but large institutions like Barclays, GE, large global organizations like that. I do think that, one of the quite useful things to look at on Cognia's website is if you go into the website, under About Us, if you scroll right to the bottom, it talks about the Cape Town location. There's actually a video clip there that gives a nice sort of rendition of the feel of the organization. Focused very much on the people. What it's intended to do is almost simulate a visit. If you were to visit one of our offices, or particularly our Cape Town office, it gives you a nice feel for that. And I'm very happy to send you through a link on that. And then, but what you will notice in that piece when the individuals introduce themselves is, notice the type of experience that people have had. They've worked globally, they've worked, in South African law firms, they've worked all over the place. Now, the interesting thing, what that means though for a graduate, is it does mean that you are, you're leaving university and you're working in an environment where you're getting exposure to actually some very interesting people who've actually worked internationally. So it tends to be quite also most of the clients are international clients as well. The global investment banks, asset managers, international law firms, et cetera, et cetera. So it tends to provide a very good grounding from a graduate perspective.
So I'm going to go back to my list of questions. We had one here, which is, how does the progression of AI and automation impact Cognia?
The progression of AI and automation is, I mean, central to our business model. I mean, law companies, the early stage ones that were called LPOs, legal process outsourcers, were very much born out of you know, a labor arbitrage where you'd literally replace people in expensive locations doing work in less expensive locations.
Is that term not used so much anymore, the LPO term, when you said the early?
No, it depends on the organizations. I mean, you know, there are some organizations, you know, that operate, that are still legal process outsourcers essentially. They tend to do a lot of sort of high volume work, a lot of litigation review, and sort of more routine work. I mean, a lot of their work is automated now as well. But I think the point I'm making is that you know, these technologies are central to everything we do. So, you know, if you take a due diligence exercise, for example, we don't manually review every document anymore. Essentially, there will be an AI tool that will extract information out of the document, that you know, key terms that you're looking for, and you will be reviewing the output of that material. So, you know, digitization, automation, AI, absolutely central. Central to, I mean, it's central to everything that anybody does now, but it's very much central to. So we look to do things smarter with a use of a more team-based, project-based approach to things, automation and digitization, and also the use of high quality, lower cost locations like South Africa. I mean, South Africa is a great example of that. So, you know, we've had feedback from some of our clients that have worked with teams of ours who've come back and said, you know, the quality of the work that's being undertaken by this team is no different to the quality that we'd expect out of a London-based team. So, you know, that's a great compliment to you know, the South African lawyers, and South Africa as a location. So it's a combination of that. It's not all about the technology, but equally speaking, the technology is a very, very important enabler to making things more efficient.
So to continue along that vein, what sort of technological experience or general experience, what are you looking for in graduates that you may bring on board? Because a lot of these things aren't really offered at university. So I'm curious about, what do they need to have in order for you to be interested?
I mean, essentially, they need to be comfortable with technology. They need to be tech savvy and comfortable with technology. So it needs to be beyond just, you know, the basic use of, although one tip I would always give is, if you're a lawyer, a law graduate, for heaven's sake, learn how to use Excel. Just learn how to use Excel. It's an amazing skill set, and actually try and get to a point where you can learn it in a more sophisticated fashion, because you'll learn how to use Word or Google Docs or whichever one you are very efficiently, because you'll be writing, you know, hundreds of essays, etc., etc. But the use of Excel and a little bit of analytics that goes with it is certainly so really what we're looking for is individuals that are tech savvy and have an open mind to the use of technology in terms of doing something. I mean, we find that graduates typically are pretty tech savvy. The only challenge that they do face is sometimes, you know, there's a very sort of, because legal training is incredibly academic, you know, there's a learning the 80-20 essentially, in terms of saying, look, you know, actually we need to get through something very quickly in terms of this review. So, you know, you've got to find a smart way of getting to this. You aren't going to be able to research it down to the nth degree. So I think it's that aptitude essentially, attitude, interest in learning, team-based players, you know, can do. You know, we tend to find that the graduates that thrive in our environment are not the ones that sit back and expect, or hope that somebody's going to create something for them. It's actually the ones that come in and go, right, okay, I need to figure this out. I need to read up on this, have inquiring minds, etc., etc. But I think on the tech side, yeah, I mean, I would tend to agree with you. If you do manage to get some exposure in your university career side of things, but equally speaking, there's a lot, and particularly at the moment, there's a huge amount going on in the legal sector for free. There are webinars, there are demos being given of technology, there are hackathons running essentially. So look out for these things, because actually as an individual or a graduate, or as a university student, there's nothing preventing you from participating in them. So some of the more leading tech tools and research tools, etc., where previously they might have charged for access to the tools, they actually have got periods during the COVID period where they're actually giving people access. Conferences which might have cost you hundreds of pounds to attend are now actually globally, you don't need to pay for them, or you need to pay a lot less. And often if you approach the conference organizers and say, look, I'm a student, they will often waive the fees. So it's worth looking out for those kind of things. But with technology, be careful of the hype. There's a huge amount of hype. There are individuals out there who would lead you to believe that it's all about technology. The lawyer is dead. It's not the case. I mean, technology is simply an enabler to doing something. So more sophisticated, the world that we're moving towards will always be a world that is made up of people, process, as we call it. So the step in which you undertake something, the efficient way of getting from A to B, and technology that enables that. That makes sense.
Absolutely, because you've kind of covered the answer to the question that someone said. At university, we're not really exposed to legal tech, apart from a few electives that you can do in final year, and what should interested students do. And I think that you've really covered that, and I want to encourage students that people love to share information. And point you in the right direction. And that I'm quite sure if they approached anybody at your firm and said, can you suggest a conference, a webinar, or something, people would quite happily, give you links and set you on your way.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I mean, the other thing is just to, for somebody to give you some input as to, well, what are the top 5 technologies you need to know something about? And what area of law do they link to? So if you were to say litigation and arbitration, I would say to you, you need to know something about review tools. Something like relativity is a review tool, and there's a huge amount on the websites, on the websites of the companies, and just having it can get a little bit confusing. So it tends to be, try and link the technology that you're looking at to a certain area of law, so that you can try and connect the, well, how does this apply essentially?
Yes.
But there's a huge amount out there, and it wouldn't surprise me if there's, post this period, there isn't a lot more. Students could potentially augment their classic university studies with actually other courses essentially. So that would certainly be worth looking out for.
Yeah, and not be restricted to the curriculum. I thought this question was interesting. How does South Africa compare to other countries in terms of how we're embracing the 4th industrial revolution?
As a country or as a legal profession?
Well, I would say we have to look at the legal profession.
Yeah, I mean, I would say, look, if I was to compare it to the US and some other places, I think that the adoption of technology into the legal profession has been slower. But that is typical of most trends. I think I'd say the use of law companies, for example, was something that came as commonplace 10 years ago, or LPOs 10 years ago in the UK and the US, or maybe even 15 years ago, whereas it's become much more evident in the last 5 years in South Africa, where it's a more commonplace option that people. So I think it's not it's not just about embracing, embracing a new trend. It does tend to follow. I mean, the good news is it will always follow, is the point. So, I think trends that you see elsewhere, particularly in the US and the UK, you will see coming through here. So I think adoption is slower. However, it is coming. And there is nothing that pushes a adoption of new ways of working like an economic recession. And if we like it or not, we're sitting fairly and squarely in one. So I think one will see quite a bit of creativity around that. And I think one's also got to remember as graduates that firms also want to be attractive to you. Particularly there's a lot of competition for the top students. So actually asking questions around, well, what do you do around technology? What is your adoption of technology, et cetera. It's something that our students and our graduates can help push because they're very fair questions, essentially.
I find students are so, there's this idea that all the power lies with the firm, and here's the student desperate to try and get articles. And I do talk to them about shifting that balance. And, you are interviewing the firm. Is this somewhere that you want to be? It's not only a matter of like, pick me.
Exactly. Yeah.
So some of the students also wanted to know some questions about you personally, and I know that you are not a lawyer. So although you run a law company, maybe you can just mention how you moved into that, not starting law, having begun in.
Yes, absolutely. So I started my career with EY. Initially, my degree is a finance degree. I have a financial accounting degree, and I moved into EY and worked as a management consultant for 7-8 years. So that's really where I started. I was actually going to join one of the large investment banks. I'd started my career in South Africa and then moved across to the UK with Ernst & Young as a consultant. And I was going to join Morgan Stanley. And applied for what looked like a very interesting job at Clifford Chance, one of the large international law firms, really just because I was curious more than anything else. And it's always a life lesson I always tell people is always follow your curiosity, because you never know where your career is going to take. So I applied for the role, and I was actually fascinated at how Clifford Chance at that stage had merged three regional firms. It was the beginning. It was the early 2000s, so 2001, bringing together and really the beginning of the large global law firms starting to come together. And I took the job. One of the reasons why, if I dig deep, I actually ended up taking the job was actually the collegial structure of a profit-sharing law firm like Clifford Chance does, whether lawyers are lone wolves or not, does drive behavior around a more of a team-based structure than a investment bank where everything is driven by your personal bonus.
You kill what you eat, don't they?
Yeah, you
eat what you kill.
That's the banking. Yes. So, but interestingly enough, the US law firms are an eat what you kill model. Right. So always be mindful of that, the difference between, particularly if you're joining a firm in South Africa, that's got international links. You've got to just see where it's actually rooted in terms of what its profit sharing structure is. But anyway, that's a topic for another day. But for me, I moved into a law firm, was very interested. Clifford Chance at the time was hiring very, very aggressively, realizing that the firm actually needed to be run by both lawyers and individuals with legal experience, and also individuals who weren't lawyers, but essentially had business skills, because actually law firms are a business. There might be a partnership structure, but there's not only the practice of law, the technical practice of law, but there's actually the business of law. So essentially, having gone into what I thought was going to be a very interesting 2-year experience for me, here I am many years later, essentially, still in the legal profession. I describe myself as a legal professional. I don't get quite as antsy as other people do when they're called non-lawyers. I don't know. Nobody's ever called me a non-lawyer, but I think maybe that's because they're scared of me. I don't know, but still. But I think from that perspective, you know, it's very interesting in terms of the application of that skill set it's a perfect marrying of the professional, and you do need the technical professional. There's no doubt, but the business acumen. Now, what I encourage young lawyers to do and graduates to do is to say, you know, in the world that you're in now, you have an opportunity to really build up both those skill sets, and over time they become highly sought after, essentially. So you know, from that perspective, they look for really places where a number of our team that have been very successful have done BCom law, for example. Very useful. Now, it doesn't mean that you won't make it if you haven't studied BCom law, but essentially, you know, building up some of that business skill, management skill, leadership skill is very, very key. You know, don't underestimate the importance of being able to manage a team. Don't underestimate the importance of the human importance of being able to build relationships with clients. It's not all about being the smartest techie, legal techie in the room. It's actually about being the individual who can actually negotiate something, who can manage the client relationship. I firmly believe the world that we're moving into, and particularly the next year and maybe a little bit longer, is going to be a hugely relationship-based. You know, we are not going to necessarily be able to sell like we used to sell and operate like we used to operate. I mean, I was talking to a very senior partner at a prestigious firm here in South Africa, who said one of the things that he's realized personally through this COVID crisis is, he said, typically he's left his clients to their own devices in between matters, because he said they're busy, they've got things to do. But he said the problem, I mean, what is clearly emerging through this crisis is that actually you need to stay in touch with people. And actually, by staying in touch with people, understanding what their current challenges are, you will be top of mind. You'll be there. The fact that you asked at the right time whether somebody was all right and they were actually about to get sick, and you continued to support them through the period, builds a huge degree of relationship. So I don't know, I've heard it a number of times, which I thought would bring a great joy to you, Amanda. There's plenty of talking about how one of the things that COVID will do is humanize things. I mean, the other thing that's been lovely is that you get on Zoom calls with lawyers across the legal profession, and they've got their daughter walking in the background, they've got the cat that climbs on the table, the dog barks. You know, it just brings so much more of a human reality into it, which has been which I think will help the profession longer term, actually.
And then my final question, I love that thing about humanizing. And I just want to say that I was so moved by seeing a newsreader who now has the setup at home. You know, they've got the projection behind her, whatever. And her kid is lying on her lap, but out of sight. And I'll send it to you afterwards. And then there's a picture, there's her kid, and she's reading the news, sounding absolutely, you know, competent and focused on the news. And she's got a quite large child lying on her lap. So yes, this merging of who we are at work and home has been interesting, because now everything happens in one space.
Yes.
So my final question is just any challenges, because we don't have that much time, but any challenges that you want to mention that you faced as a female CEO of an unconventional and innovative business? Anything as a woman that you feel you faced?
I think that I don't think it's any different to what women can generally face in business. I'm not sure that it's you know, I think when you forging forward with something that's more groundbreaking, I think what you've got to do is sort of hold your nerve and hold a degree and a level of confidence. You also have networks are hugely important when you're doing that sort of thing. So I would say I'm not sure that it's a legal profession per se. I think it's just some of the challenges of being a woman in business, and sort of holding your nerve, being authentic, being comfortable with doing that. Accepting the fact that a man will be seen in a certain way, and would say exactly the same thing as I might say, and I might be seen as aggressive. But I think that's the reality that goes with it. I mean, there is quite a lot of talk, and there's quite a lot of research that's been done recently in terms of just looking at how many female founders there actually are, and funding, access to funding. I mean, we are self-funded as an organization, so we haven't looked for funding per se, but there are a lot of women that do raise that as quite a challenge in terms of actually seeking funding. Funny enough, it's often women who are later entrepreneurs, who kind of the 40 plus generation, who set up businesses. Quite often there's quite a lot of investment capital that goes into a younger generation of women coming through. So I think there are multiple challenges that exist. But equally speaking, it does present an opportunity. I always say that you can lament it, but equally speaking, it is a woman's world at the moment. I mean, there's a huge amount of attention on women and women leaders, and the benefit that women leaders bring. I mean, you just have a look at the current COVID crisis, and some of the female pro leaders globally who've just been a shining beacon, a shining light in terms of leadership style, etc., etc. So I think there's definitely an advantage that comes to it. I mean, I would always say to women in the profession, don't try and be like a man. Be authentic, be yourself. It is your own power. It is what you bring to the table, and that's the way it goes. But there are challenges. I mean, as I've said to you before, I think sometimes when one looks back, there are possibly more challenges that you ended up overcoming, not really realizing that it was a challenge you were overcoming as a woman.
Yes. Well, I think maybe there's space for another interview at some stage, a little bit more about getting to know you as a person. And one of the topics that we've had a couple of, shared articles and thoughts on has been imposter syndrome. So there's a lot more we could dive into on the personal side. But thank you so much for everything that you've shared.
It's a pleasure.
And I know that it is a challenging time. So we're going to let you go and manage your large team. Can I just ask you, how big is your team at the moment?
Our team is, we are, if I take our project teams, we probably now at 150, nearing 200 globally.
Wow.
The team in Cape Town is at about the 100 level. So yeah, and all working virtually. That's the amazing thing.
That is. And the particular challenges of this time is also something I wanted to delve into a little bit, but we don't have time for that today. But I'm going to let you get back to your team.
Well, I mean,
it
might be it's a pleasure. It would be an interesting discussion to have.
Cool. I'm going to peg you for a second interview. Good. Thank you so much, Janet. Have a lovely day. Bye.
You too. Bye.